Hello and welcome to our fourth week of sensory evaluation lecture class. Today we'll be discussing the general requirements or principles of good practice for each sensory evaluation. So these are the things common to sensory evaluation studies or exercises that we need to take into consideration when doing our planning and execution. These requirements include the testing room or the sensory testing environment, the test protocol, and the experimental design, which includes the planning on how to make these protocols, considerations for panelists, what they should be doing and not doing before and during and even after the evaluation, and how physically fit they should be, and so on. Tabulation and analysis. So these are the statistical considerations that we do. And finally, the common procedures used in sensory evaluation. The sensory testing environment, which may or may not be a room, is usually the location where we conduct the sensory evaluation. This may be a fixed facility, such as our UP PFP Sensorium, a mobile facility, or even a makeshift facility if you're doing out of laboratory location studies. Of course, it's important for us to locate the environment close to where our panelists or judges would be. For convenience sake, you don't want them to go into the middle of a jungle or a desert just to evaluate your product. It should be free from both odors and noise. As you are using your senses, you don't want anything that would affect your panelists' senses in making their judgments regarding the food that you're presenting. Um, there should be one entry and exit point in the room for the panelist, and it should not pass through the preparation area so as not to expose your panelists to bias by letting them see or smell or hear what you're cooking or preparing. Should be the laboratory should be near the entrance of the building such that they don't have to navigate through a maze of different corridors or doors just to find where your laboratory is. If your panelists are outsiders and if they have means of transportation, then parking should be made available. You don't want them to park 1 kilometer away and have them walk just so they could spend 5 minutes analyzing whatever sample you're going to give them. And lastly, the panelists should not be loitering or wandering around the sensory area. So once they get inside the testing environment or room, they should immediately be guided as to where they should sit so as not to distract other people. In most sensory evaluation setups, the booths or testing panels are separated so that each individual could um, test the sample they are given without being unduly influenced by the people beside them. Perhaps in this pandemic setting, if ever sensory evaluation will be allowed, then we'd want to exercise social distance as well by maybe having one booth apart. Generally, the booth should have a certain minimum size, as you can see in the illustrations. And sometimes the booths could be temporary or makeshift, while in other cases, the booths are permanently fixed into the room, such is the case when we have sensory evaluation rooms that are made for that specific purpose of testing. So here is an example of a sensory testing area, okay, from the UC Davis facility. Right, you have here A1, a preparation area for food, and this one in this case includes 4 ovens. You also have a preparation area without cooking facility. So this is a rather large sensory evaluation room. No? They have more than one preparation area and they have more than one sensory evaluation room in this case. So A2, A2. In this case, you have three separate preparation areas. Okay. Um, then you have sensory booths. In this case, you have room for 24 panelists. Okay, in our case, PFP Sensorium, we only have room for 5. So we have a much smaller area to work with. And in B2, there are separate sensory booth areas, each with 6 booths, right? And they are adjacent to 2 different preparation areas. So you can have, in this case, multiple sensory evaluations ongoing at the same time. And in C, we have a sensory waiting area, like a lounge of sorts, for those panelists who are waiting for a vacant seat to be able to um, test the samples. And then there are individual workspaces for employees or students. So this may be used for, let's say, planning purposes, or if you're analyzing the data that you've obtained from the booth. And there is also a focus room or a focus group discussion room. Here you can see there's a large central table, and then there are two-way mirrors such that the observers can see through what the panelists are doing or the gestures they're making as they are conducting their group discussion. So here are other examples of sensory evaluation areas. Take note that they involve not just the booths where the panelists make their judgments, but also the kitchen type preparation area where you cook, hold and serve your samples. So it's separated by a wall with sample pass-through holes. There's an office area usually for data processing, and the panel discussion area, which you may use for focus group discussions or descriptive sensory evaluation testing. So this is just a larger example of that. So generally in a sensory evaluation testing area, you have anywhere from 3 to around 25 booths. So the small number is to control the noise inside the room, and the booth size is ideally around 1 by 1 meter, so that's enough space for the panelists to interact with the sample, have a interface device like maybe a computer, touch screen, or just a place to write down your comments on a piece of paper or the questionnaire. The serving hatches are usually less than half a meter wide, around 40 centimeters high. So this is where the samples pass through to get to the panelist directly. And the hatch style could either be a sliding type or a bread box type. There are other styles, but generally the consideration is that the sample could be revealed to the panelist, and that the type of opening doesn't really cause much trouble in terms of accidentally spilling the samples. Sometimes the sinks are used, but this is heavily discouraged because of how the odor from the sink could rise up. And usually there is a form of communication that is not audible, like a two-way signaling system using lights, usually. And there may be provision for computers, tablets, and other digital input devices for automatic data collection. So here's just another illustration looking at it from the top with a partition wall in between. And here is a side view where you can see the sample pass-through and the ventilation ducts. So this is where the panelist is, and this is where the serving area is. From the front view, you can see this one. So you may have your signaling light switches near the panelist. This is the optional sink that's usually discouraged. In this case, it's a sputum pit where you spit out the water that you have in your mouth instead of swallowing it for rinsing. And these are just examples of the actual booth. So here you can see there's a sputum pit similar to what you have in a dentist's office. And this is the other side of the preparation area. So the booths are at the back of these hatches. So these are just other examples across the globe. Hopefully we'll have something like this when our sensory evaluation room has been renovated and we're able to meet face to face. But this is the reality of how it looks like on our end. So when doing descriptive analysis panelist training sessions, we usually use open tables. And as you can see, we have a lot of training materials. These are various sensory samples for maybe taste, texture, and aroma. And the individuals in these pictures are training to evaluate them like calibrating a pH meter. They should all have the same numerical answer for a certain training sample, so that when they test on unknown samples, they'd have similar values or strength of intensity values given as well. So the testing environment should be something that has enough room to work on, depending on how many booths there are, of course, because that would determine how many samples simultaneously you could serve and how many people are needed inside. You need also ample storage for different types of products. So sometimes you have shelf-stable products, those that require refrigeration and freezing and so on. And there should also be enough equipment and utensils for you to use and for the specific test that you're going to do. And also there should be enough horizontal space for setting up samples. So imagine yourself being in a, let's say, a fast food kitchen. So you have to be efficient in the use of space, and it would allow you to have a certain workflow. Although at the same time, since the sensory testing kitchen is very generic, then you should have a layout that's applicable to the use of different products. Let's say there are products that won't require heating. There may be those that would require a microwave, a deep frying prior to serving, a holding area, hot holding area, and so on. So we should be able to plan for all of those things and yet still make it very efficient in terms of the workflow. So in general, we'd want to have a very comfortable environment when doing sensory evaluation testing. This usually applies to the panelists. So a temperature of around 20 to 22 degrees Celsius and 50 to 55% humidity. So, well, actually in the Philippines, since we're not really fans of the cold, even 25 degrees Celsius would be a bit fine. Sanay tayo dyan. For the humidity, too dry, and of course they would feel the dryness in their throat and lips among other things, and too humid and they would sweat profusely even at lower temperatures. Then there are also lighting standards to follow so that it's not too bright that they get blinded and not too dark that they don't actually get to appreciate the food in full. So you can watch this video on the link on your screen, and while you're at it, you may also want to look at other videos to see what other sensory evaluation rooms may look like. Please take note that I do not endorse the way they prepare their food, wherein they don't even have hair nets or face masks or laboratory apparel for that matter.